It's always easier to start outside because if it's not raining, you film outside. If it is raining, you go inside.
Can I interject real quick?
Sure.
Our first thing wasn't. We shot you in the house. Sorry, what's our philosophy?
Well, you have to start.
Before you can stop.
Yep. It's hard to stop something that's in motion. It's hard to start something, but once you have, it's hard to stop it once it's in motion. It's a good lesson in life. It's hard to stop something once you've started. So sometimes you have to just start.
I've been teaching at NYU for the past 15 years, and the issue is whether you're in film school or not film school, where you get the money to shoot, where you get the money for completion, to finish your film. And I tell people you just have to be inventive, and you gotta look under every nook and cranny to get it done. There's nothing I could tell somebody that's gonna be like the golden trail and you're gonna find a pot of gold. You know, at the end, that's just not the way this industry works.
How do you get a film financed, and how do you get distribution for a film? So that's the main thing. There's no clean-cut way to do either of those things. It's sometimes certain things work and sometimes they don't.
I had seen a film that I was not impressed with, and it inspired me to do anything. It was the idea, like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So I called up James. I'm like, I'm pulling the trigger on this. I've got a bunch of investors who put money into other films before. My thought was, let's jam it out and get it done. So James had a distributor friend of his.
Approaching a distributor in advance is something that really helps, especially for this film. What I did is I had my movie Pernicious, which is coming out in theaters soon, that all the distributors saw when it was playing festivals, and they had made bids on it. And the distributors that we didn't end up selling the film to, I approached and said, hey, they put in an offer for it, and I said, hey, if I made a film in the same genre, would you buy it? And they said yes, and so they pre-bought the film. And so these films were pre-sold before they were made. It was very easy to finance them based off of they were already sold before they were made. So it's like, hey, once the film is delivered, you get X amount of dollars from the distributor. It's very easy to say, hey, can you finance this, because I'm literally basically borrowing money from you for like a little bit of time and then it comes in.
He said specifically what he's looking for, as opposed to making up a movie that you're like, this is my passion project. It was, here's what the distributor wants.
They basically said as long as I'm writing and directing, which on one, and then I swung it as a 2-film deal that I would write both with Zack. Zack would direct one and I would direct one. And then they said that it had to be like ghost house type stuff. So like, genre films with a supernatural element. That's what's big right now for genre.
So it was haunted house film with a ghost girl. And inside that niche, we could do whatever we wanted. So we came up with about 12 different concepts, pitched them to him, he chose which ones he liked, and then we wrote them. And we literally wrote them over Christmas. My girlfriend is very, very kind and understanding. So over Christmas we were locked in our offices, sleeping there, writing 17 hours a day, jamming it out, and we wrote Restoration in 5 days for the first draft, and then Bethany we wrote in 7 days. And then we both went our separate ways to do our polishes on each. So I directed Restoration, he was going to direct Bethany. So I polished Restoration, he polished Bethany. So once we had that, we already had the distribution. I talked to my investors, and at this budget, we had a good MG, minimum guarantee, so it wasn't that much of a risk financially. It was a real thing to move forward with, so we did. And it's micro-budget films. It's hard. It's really hard. But we have fantastic crews and wonderful people that we're working with, and then we have begged for every favor we could get. So we then crewed up, cast up, locked it down, and started shooting. And we did them back to back. So we're doing 6-day weeks. Our Restoration was 14 shooting days, 6-day weeks, then 3 days down, and then started Bethany for 14 shooting days.
Cut. All right, that's a cut.
Easy Does It is a freewheeling adventure comedy about two friends, Jack and Scotty, robbing their way to San Clemente. Along the way, they form an unlikely friendship with their hostage, Cullen.
With their adversaries in hot pursuit, they learn that chasing dreams isn't always easy. The hardest part of making an indie film, without a doubt, is getting it financed.
In order to raise the budget we needed to make this movie, we started putting together this package for investors to see. We made a promotional concept trailer, which would show them kind of the vibe and style and tone of the movie. We wrote a very extensive business plan illustrating the potential returns the film could gain, comparing it to other previous similar films.
These folks who are potentially interested in investing want to see that they're going to get a return. And the way that you do that is show them that the film will get a distribution. We live in this great age where all of a sudden there's a lot of ways to get your movie out there. It's no longer, in theaters or straight to video. The way that you show them that they'll get distribution can be one of several things. Either it's a genre that really sells well, like horror, or, as with us, you try to attach name actors. Name actors can really kind of be the difference between an equally good movie, getting lost in the clutter, and getting, either decent or very good distribution, and people actually seeing the thing and the thing making money. The catch-22 with that is that they kind of need to know that you're serious, and that often means having the collateral, having the budget there to say, hey, I can put my money where my mouth is. So now you're caught in this catch-22, right? Where like the investors are like, oh yeah, no, I like your script, I'll invest if so-and-so comes on, and meanwhile the actor says, that's, I like the role, I'll come on if you for sure have the, have the capital, have the budget.
I would say the Mothman Prophecies, which was another Richard Gere film, was, and there was one seminal moment, and again, that was a film that had been shopped all over town. Every company, independent, medium, big studio, all passed on it. I wasn't involved at the time. The agent shopped it. The writer I had produced before, I actually got to produce his first film. And he came to me and said, would you read this? And I fell in love with it. And then I learned it had been passed on. And I found there was one company, and only one company, that hadn't seen it. And that was Lakeshore, wonderful company. So I said, you know what, I will invest time in this, and I will take it to Lakeshore. And I knew that was it. There was literally one buyer in the whole world I could sell this to. So I went to them and they read it, 3 executives, and they called me the following Monday morning, typical Monday morning call, right? Brilliant story, we loved the craft, it was intriguing, based on a true story, oh my God, fascinating, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful responses from all of them. At which point one of them said, so thanks so much for sending it over, it's going to be a pass. Only in Hollywood. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm sorry, did you just say it's going to be a pass? All this laudatory language, and then you're dead. And there was a long pause because I knew this was it. This was the last man standing. There was no other option. And that was the company, I mentioned this earlier, that was the company, the moment when I said, I respectfully pass on your pass. And there was some nervous laughter. I said, look, of course you can pass, but based on our relationship and our respect for one another, I would ask them, before you make a final decision, let me just come in and talk to you. So I went to this meeting. I told these 3 executives the story of my relationship with my dad. Why? Because the script, when I read it initially, was so moving to me, because the character played by Richard Gere is so lost in grief after his beloved young wife dies. And a lot of what the texture of it was reminiscent to me of what I felt after my dad's death. He was my best friend. And to me, this film was a great film in its own right. It deserved to get made, and more importantly, it would be a private homage to my dad. And so I cared deeply about it. So I went into this meeting with 3 people who'd read it and said nice things about it, but passed on it. And so I felt the door was open just a little bit. And I never referenced the script, I never talked about the title, I just simply told him the story of my dad. I told him who my dad was. I told him about our friendship and our relationship and the love that we had, and what it was like when, unexpectedly, never having been sick, he just passed away, and what that was to my family and to me. And I just spent, not long, 12 minutes, 10 minutes telling him this story, at the end of which I simply said, I cannot imagine anyone filmmaker, actor, audience, doesn't matter, who will not be moved. We're wired, whether we lost someone or not, we're wired to understand the tragedy and despair of losing someone so close to you. And they huddled and they changed their mind. Bottom line, they changed their mind. And we got to make this film. And it's a great film. It wasn't as big as Pretty Woman, but it was well received and actually become more popular over the years. And I'm very proud of the film, but in a way, as a learning lesson, it's like, you know, we talked earlier about never take no for an answer. And I think what I came away from that was, if you are, you know, if you're ballsy enough, if you're bold and courageous enough, just to, it's like, get naked in public. If you're willing to get naked in public, people are impressed, right? Because we all know about vibration and frequency, and if you're like, you know, when you're deeply moved and you're in that very deeply authentic place, and there's no BS, we know it, it's real. That's very attractive to us, and that's what we want to put on a big screen, and that's what they got. They got why this is going to move the audience and therefore potentially be a success. And the film was successful as a business matter, but that's not, you know, I don't measure it in those terms. I just think, how do I get a yes from these people so I can do what I so desperately want to do as a creative person?
Neil never stopped believing in his band. Jonathan Kane never stopped believing, and Arnell never stopped believing, and we as filmmakers like never stopped believing. It's like really a theme, and you know, we kind of jumped out there on our own credit cards. We didn't have funding in place and everything, and the first time I saw a little clip that Ramona put together, I said, we have to do this. And she's like, well, they're on tour right now. And I said, right now? We were standing in a Starbucks parking lot. She said, yeah. I said, we're missing the story. It's unfolding. Like, we have to go now. And she was like, well, we don't have money. And I said, well, we can't let that stop us. Don't let that stop us. So within a week of that conversation, we were on the road, just like putting stuff on credit cards. And we just always knew. And there was one moment, you know, because we were so small and we didn't have a lot of money, there was only 5 of us on a road. So there's 2 camera operators, 1 sound, Ramona, and myself. And my job was always sort of to PA and, you know, to drive and just dump footage and just do kind of all the things, anything else that, you know, needed to be done. And I remember at one point, we were probably like maybe at the 6th venue, and I was sitting back there and it kind of dawned on me. I said, we're like charging up a storm. We're following a rock band. We don't have any money. We don't know what the movie is. We don't know anything. We're just out here. And I watched like 10 minutes of Arnell in the dressing room, and he captivated me. I couldn't take my eyes off of him, and that's when I knew. I was like, we're going to be all right. Like, I knew we're going to be all right.
It was probably about 3 years. I had an idealism that I would write the script and it'd be a David Sedaris thing, the first and probably only David Sedaris project. And my thing was, so, okay, even though it's a little dark and offbeat, people are going to want to make it. You know, people are going to make this and make it on a higher end indie budget level, you know, like a few million. And it was a little naive on my end to think that, you know, I was putting a lot of restrictions on it. You know, I think when you're going for money, you need to know where are your priorities? For me, my priority was in controlling the material, keeping the script the same, and being able to decide on having, you know, the final say on casting. Like, those are the kind of things then that are going to push investors away. Not to say that if I embraced all those things, anyone would have jumped on board, but ultimately I'm making a movie that was dealing with religious themes of sexuality, you know, stuff that isn't necessarily... every time I see an independent film, I'm like, I don't know how they got it financed. And I mean, I always feel it as a compliment, you know, especially when I see ones made like, I'm like, how did that happen? I think every single film finds its own way, and usually that way is totally different than the previous way, you know. I mean, it was just a long process of really getting a lot of no's. At one point, I think I calculated it was like, once it got like over like 150 no's or so, I stopped counting. Like, I kept a running chart, and when it was like hit that many of people, like financiers or producers or production companies that had passed on it, then I just like stopped keeping a number tally because it got a little depressing. You know, I feel like I have a thick skin, but I think it's okay for anyone to feel like 150 rejections on the same script is a little, it could be a little mind-numbing, you know. But it was, you know, but it was about I thought the system would sort of serve me a little better. Like I thought, well, I made my first film and people saw it and people liked it, and now I've written the script and it's a well-known author and I have agents and it'll come together in the way it should. And it was kind of wrong for me to feel that way, because ultimately it came together through whatever resources I sort of engaged and build, and so I had support from Film Independent that I had on my own, that I had built over the years. And I got brought into a program where I met a producer who came on board that brought financing. So it was one of those things that ended up being through my own path. And not to say that as anything negative towards the agency route, but just to say that, like, at no point should you ever just sort of be like, okay, well, now I have reps and they're going to get it all taken care of. Like, no, at the end of the day, you're always responsible for yourself. And I think financing is no different. Just about always staying on top of anyone anyone who might know someone with money, and just always staying persistent on it and keep on pushing, because everyone's gonna say no. I mean, I've rarely ever heard of a story where someone was like, I sent the script out, people liked it, we got it made. Like that maybe happens with genre films, but I don't think it ever happens with a drama or a comedy, or especially not a dark comedy,
Well, I think that when you're looking for money, you have to have you have to be tough as nails and not be deterred by no's. All it takes is that one person, that one grant, that one scholarship. Money can show up, can fall out of the sky sometimes. I mean, that's not something that you have to wait for. One of my own most favorite quotes is by Brooklyn Dodger owner Branch Rickey, who signed Jackie Robinson. And the quote is this: "Luck is a residue of design." So, if you're working and busting your ass, you have a better chance of luck smiling down upon you. But you're just chilling and not extending any energy, no get up and go. We're not seeing that elbow grease. We're not seeing initiative. We're not seeing that blood, sweat, and tears. Very rarely will you find yourself in a lucky situation.
Speaking of which...
But you can't depend on luck, though. You can't depend on luck. I've been very lucky. To be honest, when I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, there was only one African-American director working in Hollywood. His name was Michael Schultz, directed one of my favorite films, Cooley High. And so when I would tell my African-American friends, they're like, they let black people direct films? And so I never ever thought about the odds. A lot of times you think about stuff like that, it could be a self-inflicted paralysis. But I knew I wanted to do. And I was committed that through hard work, God willing, something will break my way, and it happened.
I think you have to have a lot of patience, and you have to know that it's not one phone call, that it's many phone calls that you'll be making, that you'll come back to the same people over and over and over again. It's a matter of getting people comfortable with you, of getting them on your side. So instead of thinking that you're going out to raise money, you have to think that you're going out to woo people, to bring them into your camp, to make them part of your support system, to just get their enthusiasm for your project. And, if the money isn't forthcoming immediately, that doesn't mean it's not going to come in the long run. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to help you in some other way. So I think it's almost like gathering your tribe around your project, getting people who see your passion and believe in you. So I think that's the attitude you have to go in with.
Armando Montalongo, I had not met. I didn't even really know about him because Brian never really spoke to me about him. He kind of said it vaguely initially when we were packaging this together. He said, "Oh, I work for this guy who's really successful in real estate," and that was about the extent of my knowledge of Armando Montalongo when I was packaging this together. Because Brian had come out to Hollywood, and together we were sort of taking meetings with a lot of production houses and studios trying to sell this story. I put a package together, business plan, budget, all that stuff. And when we went to these meetings, it was very difficult because Brian, stutters a little bit, and I think a lot of people thought that he was always nervous in the meetings. And they were like, calm down, and he wasn't nervous, he just has a slight stutter sometimes, and obviously if he's nervous, it gets worse. But so a lot of the meetings had these hiccups because they all thought that he was nervous, and being the director, or pursuing the first-time director of his project that he wrote, that made investors a little hesitant of like, this guy's not confident enough to direct. And he's extremely confident, but he had this one, physical trait that kind of perceived him differently. And also there was the aspect of where every person that we met with would say, well, because in our business plan, all the leads that we had already, Walter Perez, Jeremy Ray Valdez, myself, and Fernando Romero attached. So we had them in the business plan, and they're all Latino. So when any investor looked at that business plan, they didn't really see any white faces, familiar faces. They just saw a lot of brown faces. And that was another reason why they were very hesitant, because they were like, can't you make one of them Latino and maybe the other three? Like, leave the girl as Latina and maybe the three guys are all non-Latino. And that happened a lot. So we just kept going, and it was very heartbreaking because, Brian was out here. He has his own family, he has 2 kids and a wife back in San Antonio, so he was apart from them. And he was out here, and he kept hearing this, constant, like, change your characters. Maybe we need another director because you don't seem like you're, confident enough person to direct this film. So those were the obstacles that we faced. And we just did our best to try and educate ourselves. Eventually, we went and met one of the directors that I worked with on Band of Brothers and The Mentalist, David Nutter, and he gave us some great advice. Brian had great editing skills, and he told Brian that Brian should edit a sizzle trailer of his film from clips of other movies. So he should take clips of other movies that are thematic to what he wants Mission Park to be. And fortunately for Brian, all the actors who were attached to the project, Fernanda, Walter, Jeremy, and myself, had work that he could, extract scenes from. So he pieced this amazing trailer with us in it, and it looks like the film. It was brilliant. Finally, Armando saw that Brian was really putting in the effort to get this project made. And I met with Armando finally, so I think he was like, wow, this project and these guys are really serious. So he read the script finally, I think after 2 years of Brian trying to get him to read the script. I only took 1 year. Armando took 2 years to read the script. And he loved it. And I think after that, Brian showed him the trailer that he had made that David Nutter recommended he make. And Armando thought that we had made the film already. And he felt like, what? I missed the boat on this one? And he hadn't. Brian was just very clever at making the trailer. And that sort of is what kickstarted Armando into joining the team. and he's been an amazing supporter. I mean, he's our sole investor, one man. And we always believed that one person would come and believe in this project the way we did, and that was Armando.
I've had conversations where someone goes, I have someone who wants to put money in movies, but they're pro-NRA, very political. So you have to make sure there's guns in the film in some positive way. That's sort of the Ed Wood conversation, you know? It's like, oh, the film was going to end with a big explosion, but the film ends with this. Not anymore. Also, I got a nephew, not a bright boy, but something tells me he'd be a hell of a lead. You have these constraints on it. Sort of the best way to preface the conversation, I think, is if someone knows someone who has access to money or knows people who have access to money, is to say to that person, okay, here's what I need. I need this much money. Here's the investment agreement or whatever it is. And you have these people. If you can get these people to come in and sign the line which is dotted and make this film a go film, I'll give you 10% of the budget as your fee. And I'll make you an executive producer. You'll be an executive producer, and when the cash hits our account and clears, the first check is going to be to you. So if we're raising $200,000, the first check is going to be to you for $20,000 for finding the money. And that's a good way of approaching it, because a lot of these deals are done through social means. I mean, film is not a smart financial investment. There's not a lot of return. You don't do it because it's going to make money. You do it because it's fun, because it's cool. You do it because you like movies. You do it because you like the people involved. You believe in the dream. You do it because you know that if no one had invested in Darren Aronofsky or Quentin Tarantino in the beginning, we wouldn't have Black Swan or Pulp Fiction. You do it for those reasons. So if you take it involves being that politician again, and taking someone to dinner and buying them drinks and saying the right things and making sure you're fit. And I think there's only so much of a show you want to put on and so many compromises you want to make before it's silly. But if you have a buffer, someone who knows that person and gets along with them already, they're friends, having them have an incentive to get the deal done, to maybe take that dinner, one with you, one without you, and sort of be the social buffer and stay in the situation and help work it out, it's not a bad way to go. And it's not dishonest, because, you know, it is, you're being honest about what you want. We want this money. But this person's involved in the process and they can make a little coin off of it. It's not a bad way to go.
The budget was about 120.
And we started out looking to make it for 100.
Yeah.
So I had this idea. I had worked with a Scottish producer who I knew had $100,000 to put into a movie. And he had said to me, he'd offer $100,000 to 3 filmmakers to make movies. And they had all said, well, can I use that to raise more money? And he had said, no, you have to make it for 100,000. And he said, it really blew me away that then they just passed on it, you know? And I just stored that story in my head. And when I had finished writing Obsoletia, I said we said, okay, let's hit him up for the $100,000 and let's make this movie for $100,000. And so at that point, we sought a line producer to make a budget, because we said, okay, we want to go to this guy, this possible investor, and be able to say to him, here's the script, we want the $100,000 that you offered to 3 other filmmakers and they turned you down. We're going to make a movie for $100,000, and here's the budget, and here's how we're going to do it. And here's the schedule, and here's everything, and we're going to make this movie for $100,000. And so we then sought a line producer on Craigslist to do our budget for us. I put a lovely ad on Craigslist. I met a lot of different line producers, and one of them was Matt Medlin, who came on board to do that, and he was like, I can make a budget for $100,000. A bunch of them just said, you cannot make this movie for $100,000. But so we started really with that thing of budgeting the movie, how do we make this movie for that amount? There's 2 ways to approach a budget. One is sort of how much does everything cost, and then add it up and see what it is. And the other way is, how do we make this movie possible for that amount? And so, then we had to get real. To make the movie for $100,000, we had to lose some things from the script.
Mm-hmm.
So and change things. In the original script that he had, there was
animals,
there
children.
Was a cat that was a sort of character in the movie.
No,
there was
gone.
A little kid.
Gone.
There was so there was things like that. There was just sort of
gone.
This is going to make it, these are things
Yeah.
that are not going to be possible on this budget. And I was absolutely obsessed with this has to be doable. It has to be realistic on this budget. I don't want to be making a movie that's over-ambitious for the price because I know that's like a short, ticket to failure. So we worked on the script as well, and like I cut locations. For instance, after the main couple go on their date, there was a lovely scene in a cafe or restaurant. Instead, I made it at his house. So it's things like that. So it's just like getting creative with the script to make it doable for 100,000. During the process of meeting the line producers, I also met one young man called Ken Morris, who was just really lovely and super enthusiastic about the project. He was just out of university, so we felt like he probably didn't have the necessary experience to like be the producer, be a producer on the film. But it ended up the investor that we'd initially hoped to get the 100,000 from. It ended up he wanted to invest some money in it, but his situation had changed for him, and he didn't want to invest as much as 100,000. And he did love the project and became very, involved with it.
Yeah.
And was very involved in the development of it. But he then didn't have the money to put up for it. And so suddenly we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Who are we going to get the money from? And Ken Morris, this young guy who I'd met as a possible line producer, he was, and I just said, like, let's keep him involved. And, he's a terrific young man. Suddenly, he said, I think perhaps I can get the money. And he actually brought in a large part of the money.
And then we kicked in.
And then we kicked in too.
The rest.
Like I think actually our budget when we went to production had already moved up to about 105 or something, and then continued to move up. So it was sort of like over budget. The shoot wasn't over budget. The shoot stayed completely within. The thing that we hadn't fully budgeted for realistically was post, in particular sound.
Which was more expensive than we had anticipated.
Because of wind in the desert, or?
Well, that did play a factor in it. There was some wind issues.
I didn't hear them, but I noticed it was very clean.
There was some wind issues, but that did play a factor in it.
Because we paid for a decent sound mix. I mean, we had a great sound recordist on set, a sound mixer, Tom Curley, who was phenomenal, and he did a great job, and he got us great sound. But then I think, and it's just that thing, like, for a film to work, the sound does need to be half decent. And we did end up spending a decent bit of money to get a proper professional sound mix done, and I think a lot of those tiny movies don't do that.
And also as well, this is...
Because it is expensive and it does kill them. And it can kill them.
We weren't on that as much as we should have been from the get-go. Again, it gets into building your team earlier as opposed to waiting till the last minute. If we'd have built that team a little earlier, I think we probably would have been in a position where we could have negotiated a better price with the sound. With the people that we chose. But they saw that we were behind the 8 ball, so they basically, pushed their agenda more than ours.
All I remember is meeting a former NYU graduate, and he said, oh, you should meet this guy. Because and even at that time, I was kind of worried about being dependent on a studio or a network or giving me a job. I mean, it already felt enormously competitive. All I had was my thesis film. I wasn't going to get picked to direct Aliens or something. That wasn't going to happen. And I started to think independently. I was like, well, look, I've got to demonstrate that I can make a feature film to myself and anybody else. So I can't wait on somebody giving me money for a feature film, so I got to figure out a way to do this. And he was like, oh, well, that's, because so many people are like, well, studio, I'm only going to make $50 million movies and I'm going to spend the next 10 years in development. And then it's like, I never had the patience for that. And I guess I was a bit of a pessimist. I was like, look, I'm going to have to do this somehow on my own.
Or a realist.
And I just was like, okay, how do I do that? Well, I don't have the money, but this guy did. This guy had the money, at least a modicum of money.
Right, on the credit card.
And he had the will. His name was Mick Weinhoff, and Mick was like, I'm going to do this. And I think he was suffering from the same sort of fatigue that all of us. He had been coming as an actor. He had been trying to get parts and stuff, and had some success, but he was getting frustrated. He's like, this is going nowhere. No one's going to give me a lead part. So I need to come up with a way where I can get a lead part. Well, I'll produce a movie, I'll pay for it. That'll guarantee me this lead part. And he had the strength and he had the smarts enough to put the thing together. He's the one who got Danny Bonaducci. But he still needed someone like myself to write and direct it and bring more cast and more crew and bring that. And so it was a good, it was a classic collaboration. He had these resources, but he needed this. He needed this from me, and I needed someone to bankroll my first feature. So that's how that happened.
I think working on credit cards is I'm not going to advise that, because that's really scary. That said, if I had a credit card that had no interest for a year, and I knew I could make that money back in a year with a reasonable amount of certainty, I might not do that. But I think it's always better to go with positive cash. I have done this. I have closed an IRA to fund a part of a film. I have done that. So it's like saying, the whole thing is you miss all the shots you don't take. Well, you also don't have all the films you don't make. Like, how long are you going to be dead? Like, here's your death. Here's forever. Well, I died with all this money. Yeah, but you could have made another film. Those films are made over here. They're not made here. So, and I think, as I get older, and it takes me 3 or 4 years to make a movie, I get very aware of time. How many more films do I have before I'm too old to lift the camera, or before I get mocked?
So you just sold all the Levitz furniture stock, and you said,
yeah, you make it. But again, I think, I know these filmmakers out of New York, and they make a film every couple of years, and they made one on 16. They raised a lot of money, and then they went on Super 16 a few years ago. They made the next one for like 40 grand. They wanted to make another one. They didn't have access to money. They hadn't gotten money from this yet. They hadn't gotten money from this yet. They were in a place where they didn't have money. They didn't want to crowdfund. So they found a way to make a film for $1,000. They made shot on a 5D, and one of them acted in it as the lead, and they got another actor they knew in New York to play the other lead. And they went back to their hometown, and they shot in their parents' restaurant. Their parents played her parents and these people that they knew, and they shot the crew of like a very small crew with lavaliers and a little mic pack, and crew of 2, and they shot this thing for under $1,000. And it's a really good movie. I mean, it's a really well done movie. It's a very well acted film. They knew exactly where to bring in real actors and where to let people be themselves, using these locations that they could control. And they took the time, and they shot on, again, they used labs, used a zoom and a 5D, and the film looks and sounds great. It's a really good movie for $1,000. So I think you find a way to do it. It's really how it works. Maybe their next film they'll crowdfund it. Maybe the next film they'll do this. But you kind of have to, unless you have a reliable source of revenue or you have a trust fund, you really have to kind of alternate how you raise money for movies, and you have to kind of pick the right way of raising money for that film, or pick the film based on the money you have access to at that time.
I would definitely have to say the first one, She's Gonna Have It, which cost $175,000, because that was my debut film as far as a feature film, as feature films go. And people think that I did that film right after film school. There was a 4-year period between me finishing NYU and She's Gonna Have It coming out. So it was not like that. And then another one would be Malcolm X. We ran out of money and I had to go get some money too.
Does it ever get easier?
What's easy? What's easy? I mean, if it was easy, I wouldn't have launched a Kickstarter campaign. We're in day 5. So this is tough business. And I really, and E can tell you, he's one of my students, and every time I'm here in LA, he helps me. But I do not try to sugarcoat things all to my students. And it would be a great disservice to them if I did that. So I let them know, this is no guarantee it's going to happen for you.
So for my first film, 10 Miles Per Hour, we financed it in large part with credit cards. Both Josh and I said, we can't find any sponsors, we don't know where the money's at. Put a lot of work into that, put a lot of energy into trying to get other people to help fund the film, and really blanked out. So we just took our credit cards and financed it, and we got to a point in the process where we needed to tap into a little bit of our retirement savings, which was nice that I had that available, because I know some people don't, and it's interesting because people are always so afraid to spend their retirement, but I found it really a freeing activity. Like, ultimately it's been a great way to use that investment to ultimately further my life and my experiences, which I think should be the right thing. So that was 10 miles per hour. It was tough. We took a lot of our own money and just dumped it in and said, we've got to get this thing done, and we've got to make it and put it out to the market. Eventually, over the course of time with 10 miles per hour, the money that we did, hard cash that we actually spent on our credit cards and retirement was returned to us. So that was cool. All the sweat, I'd say, probably never totally got paid back. But it's nice to know that the film is still generating some revenue almost, 8 years or so after its release. So it's pretty cool. Second film, 10 Yards. We were actually, at this point in time, able to start looking at some sponsorships, and we were able to close some sponsorships, but it was pretty limited. I mean, we were talking $15,000 to $20,000, somewhere in that range of cash that we raised, but it took quite a bit of edge off with making the film. By this time, we had some of the camera equipment already. We'd invested some of that early money into sort of building a program. There was also some additional cash that was put in as sort of an investment from an individual, and so that was, again, we were in a place where all of a sudden there was a little bit of money, but we didn't quite have enough money to really round it out, get the film done, and then have enough left over for a launch. So we were, burning all of the cash on production, which is probably the biggest challenge I think filmmakers face. Is we get a little bit of money somehow or another, and we blow it all to make this film. And then you're in this situation where, okay, the film's made, a lot of times people blow it all before they edit it, and then that's a really difficult position to be in. So I think, you really got to think that through and divvy it up and let people know early off that it's going to be a long time before they probably see money. So with 10 Yards, unfortunately, because we were putting all of the money that we received from these sponsorships and this individual, we were putting it all into, making the film and trying to market the film. We ended up spending more money of our own and getting a little bit further into debt. So after that film, I was in a tough place. Couldn't figure out how to make any money off that film. It was just my sophomore slump, and it was a really tough one. So, but moving on to my third film, Ride the Divide. I'm figuring things out. I'm realizing, okay, sponsorships, man, I know I can make these work better by this time. I had 2 examples, and I could sort of paint 10 Yards as a success to the sponsors when we went out to try to get money. So I worked with Mike Dion on this, and we went out and we actually raised quite a bit of sponsorship money, I'd say. I want to say around 50 grand, and then there was, again, private investment put into that film, probably equal amount in private investment. So we actually had a nice chunk of money that was put in that film. As we got closer to release, there was another little bit of investment that came in to finish it up. And so that film was great because we were in a situation where there was always cash, but we were very smart about not overspending cash. And most of that money is going into production, not really paying people. It's going into travel. It's going into, the aspects of post-production where you really need to hire expertise like sound and color correction, and just finishing the film and getting it really solid, being able to buy product and things like that so you can sell the film. So we had a great situation where when that film was done, there wasn't too much of that, money to pay back. There was a little bit, I think there was a little bit of debt/investment that was put into that film. And so we were able to pay that off quickly because the film was really successful and had, was by far my most profitable film so far that I've worked on. And it continues to do really well. And that film released 3 or 4 years ago, I think, about 3.5, and it's still doing really well. So it's pretty cool because it's like we passed that mark. Now it creates a revenue stream that I try to figure out ways not to use, but inevitably I do at times to make sure I further my career. I keep reinvesting in my films. So moving on to the fourth film, that was Where the Yellowstone Goes, which was made in tandem with another film called Reveal the Path. And I have some ownership in each of those films, so we can kind of talk about both of those together. Essentially, Where the Yellowstone Goes was able to raise about $75,000 in sponsorship money. This is coming from basically corporate brands or a nonprofit, one nonprofit for corporate brands. And they put money into the film because they liked the message that told. We found ways to create some ancillary content and just kind of help, you know, use the film to drive at some of the messages they're trying to communicate and reach the same audience. Then we were also able to raise some crowdfunding money around the time that film was finished and ready for market, which helped it go to market. We took all the money we raised in crowdfunding and put it into pushing the film further out there and getting more screenings set up, which is scary to do because you're like, you work so hard and you're like, oh, all of a sudden we got $32,000 in the bank, and you're like, this is great, it's payday. But we look at it and we're like, it's not. It's almost like you keep putting this money in there one way or another. And so that film's also done really well, and it was nice that the minute it went to market, for the most part, I mean, there's a little bit maybe to pay off for like a month or two, but like it was like basically instant money that we're able to give back to the partners and the creators. At the same time, we made Reveal the Path, which it got more investment than sponsorship. It got a little bit of sponsorship, not as much as Where the Yellowstone Goes. I can't say the exact figure, but you know, it's less than $75,000. But it got also quite a bit of infusion of investment. It was a highly intensive, like, travel around the world film where we went to 5 different countries and shot. And so we're dealing with a more expensive film than Where the Yellowstone Goes. And so in the end, that film went to market and had a lot of money to pay back. And we're still at a point where we're paying that film back. So that's just kind of an example of how you gotta weigh all these things and be careful. If you can raise some money and really be careful about how you spend that money, and then, you know, try to get partners, creative partners on board who will benefit later, you can get to that money coming in quicker. And then finally, Walter is a very low budget film, a lot of sweat for both my wife and I. It's kind of a collaborative project where we came together as we were getting married and made this film. And so we had some investment, about $35,000 in investment to make the film. We used that cash and then raised $25,000 for its release, and put a lot of sweat and got some friends to help us out. So we've got our creative partner strategy, and we're now releasing it with not too much debt. We have some investment, but that's part of it kind of balances out with the creative partners as well. So I mean, we hope that by next year, or, you know, early next year, depending on how fast we push the release, because we've been thinking about kind of taking time, but we hope that film is paying everybody back, you know, soon. So it seems to be working, you know, but and keep in mind that Walter actually started before Where the Yellowstone Goes, so it kind of fits in there, and ultimately Where the Yellowstone Goes has led to another film, a whole river series, and one of the sponsors that was involved with that doubled their commitment to the next film and intends to do a series of more river films with us. So we're doing sort of the same sort of strategy where we keep a documentary that is essentially low cash budget, high sweat budget, and in the end has a quicker payout for the people that are involved, that are committed and take the chance.
Well, the first time was pieced together. You know, I was from the community from Alton, you know, little bits and pieces here and there, and then I teamed up with a production company in Los Angeles, and they came on board as co-financers, and that happened over about a year and a half. That was unique in that sense. It took a long time, but you know, that really fell into, you know, many different resources. I think at the end of the day we had like 22 people who had equity in the movie. On the second film, it was financed by one person. It was the story he wanted to tell. He was the executive producer, and it's what, you know, it was a vanity project. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He had the money, he wanted to tell the story, and he hired people to do it. And that, you know, and I was one of those people he hired. I didn't have to raise any money, and I got to be creative and everything. The third film, Joint Body, was a similar deal, only 3 people I did, dealing with the guy that gets out of jail.
Again, Alton, some Alton equity, and then some equity from the East Coast. And then She Loves Me Not, which is what I just finished, was sort of along the lines of the cover-up, was financed by one individual, but it was more altruistic in the sense of he was living in this beautiful home that has a lot of history in the community, and he saw it as an opportunity to blend sort of the history of the home from the 20s and show how it's evolved into now. And so he approached me and said, I want to do this film in the house, and are you willing to talk to me about a potential story? So it was much more organic in how that grew, but I was still given guidelines. It's not like I approached him and said, hey, I want to make a movie in this beautiful estate.
The initial part, as soon as I decided to make the film, I reached out to two women I had worked with extensively over the years, documentary filmmakers, and Kobe Atlas and Kira Thompson. Kira just won an Emmy. She is a producer, supervising producer on The Voice, and Kobe is amazing, vice president of PBS for programming, used to be, and now she's doing a gazillion other things. So I reached out to them, and they helped me kind of get my footing. And I'd actually raised enough money. I'd raised $60,000 for another documentary. And when I wanted to do this one, I just asked our donors if they would be willing to let me transfer it. And then I reached out to my very first boss, Teresa Tellini Coleman, and asked her if I could run the film through her nonprofit, which is what I'd done with my short documentary. And as soon as she heard about the subject, she was like, I want to be involved, I want to work on it. And it just so happened that she had the exact same amount of money that she needed to invest into a film, because it's a nonprofit, so it needed to be kind of recirculated. And so we had just enough for a super bare bones shoot. I mean, we were paying people $100 a day. But luckily, since I'd worked in the film industry most of my life, I could get great people, and they were doing it as a favor to me. And so we actually did run out of money on the shoot, and I had to put in some of my own life savings, just a bit, but some. And then afterwards, we came back, we cut together this 23-minute fundraising trailer, and I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I thought, okay, we'll apply to some foundations and some religious organizations and government institutions and, Spanish tourism and all these places. But of course, that was right when the crash happened. And Spain was just a mess. I mean, there was just no money there whatsoever. And we got turned down right, left, and center. All the traditional funding sources, except for one grant we got from Pacific Pioneer Fund. And then we also got 2 small grants from American Pilgrims. But then everything else was all raised from individuals. And what happened was, after about 1.5 years of trying the traditional funding, I realized it wasn't going to happen that way. And it pretty much turned into me asking everyone I'd ever met or knew for money. And here was a case, though, I really had to kind of do some work around my issues with money and asking for money and asking for help. And what was really neat and really extremely touching was my high school classmates really turned out, and they funded almost 40% of the post of that phase of once I needed to finish the film, and incredibly supportive. People I hadn't seen in 30 years sending in $1,000 checks, and then I had 4 out of 5 of my funding producers I had gone to high school with, and I was also really one of my classmates is Dan Brown, who did the Da Vinci Code, and he and his wife stepped in and funded the whole online process. Once they saw the rough cut, and they were just really touched and believed in the project. And if it wasn't for Dan and Blythe, I might still be fundraising.
Advice to other filmmakers on doing the same, not only just getting over the hurdle of having to ask for help, which is a big thing. We all, DIY, we want to do this ourselves. No, we don't need anyone's help, but ways to do it, ways to get over that?
Yeah, there's a couple of books I really recommend. I think kind of working on your internal stuff with money is the first step. I think pretty much everything we do really is from the inside out. There's a book called Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. And then Lynn Twist also has a CD set, Fundraising from the Heart. And I think that the biggest thing I would encourage people is only do things that you're 110% believe are going to do some good in the world. There has to be something fueling you more than money, more than fame, like some really inherent strong pull for you, because it's just too hard otherwise. I mean, to sustain it.
But it kind of goes back a few years. We were hoping to make this movie originally in, I think I first got together with Joe in 2006 or 2007. We were hoping to make it in 2008 for $2 or $3 million. You know, that was the goal. Like, aim high with your budget, right? And because you never know, you may get lucky. And you know, it was kind of in the era of Squid and the Whale, and you know, indie movies you could get made for that. It wasn't so crazy. Anyway, and we were getting close to that point. We were getting a great cast, because at that point you're offering some real money. I mean, not real money in the sense that we didn't have it, but it's finance contingent money. But anyway, we were getting it out to good actors, and we were getting a great cast. But then the economy, as you well know, tanked in the fall of 2008, and there was no way you could raise millions or thousands or even hundreds or tens of dollars for any film at any budget level for at least 6 more months or so. So luckily for me, that happened to coincide with, if you remember, it was also during the election campaign of 2008, with a side project that I was doing here in the garage, which was with another filmmaker who was staying here for about 5 months at least, named Eitan Gorlin, another Slamdance guy. And he and I were doing this completely unrelated project. It was about a Washington-based pundit. And originally it was a series of short films, then it was a TV pitch, and then we kind of were incubating this character. His name is Martin Eisenstadt. Online, we gave him a blog and a website, and he and people in the media started to believe he was real. And so there was a lot of press about this at the time, and it kind of culminated with Sarah Palin not knowing that Africa was a country, not knowing it was a continent. She said it was a country. She really did say, but our character took credit for being the source of that story. Anyway, MSNBC had breaking news, but they had egg on their face because he wasn't real, and they were saying he was the source of the story. Anyway, long story short, New York Times did a big half-page profile of us, and the next day we got a book offer. So when presented from a very prestigious New York publisher for our Stress Giroux. And so when presented with the option, do you keep not getting paid to not direct a movie, or do you get paid to write a book? One's wife tells you to write the book. And so we did that. Eitan and I wrote this book. You know, we took a complete hiatus off of Between Us. He was trying to get a feature of his made at the time as well. And we wrote the book. We had a great time on the book tour. It was very critically acclaimed. It sold well. It was, you know, very successful. We went back to pitching it as a TV show and actually came very close to a deal with Ashton Kutcher's company, who was going to produce it. CBS Studios was behind it. It was going to be on Showtime, and then the deal fell through because one executive got fired or something, you know. And so it was like, so much for our TV career. You know? But my previous casting director from Open House, Liz Jareski, said, you know what, why don't we go back to Between Us? At the end of the day, it was 4 people in 2 rooms. How hard could it be? Let's, you know, we know how to make these micro-budget movies. Let's do that. So she put in a little bit of money now and came on as a producer. We raised some money on Facebook. Then this is early years of Kickstarter, and we did a Kickstarter campaign. And that was enough to, you know, so by the time we had around $40,000 or so, $45, something in that range, that was enough to set a start date. I knew we could always make something at that level. And so we went back to the agents and managers that we were casting with originally and said, okay, well, the script hasn't changed. We never rewrote the script to be a lower budget. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. And the parts are the same. So if you liked it before and your actors liked it before, they're going to like it now. we're just not paying them, really. You know, we'll pay them $100 a day, and we had enough to afford that. We didn't have enough to pay the crew. We had enough to feed the actors, as long as they didn't have peanut allergies, because then we couldn't give them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So that's always the first question to ask.
Or gluten.
Yeah, or gluten. Yeah, no, that would have tanked. But thankfully, actors don't eat. I mean, it's axiomatic in this town. Like, actors, I mean, they don't eat carbs at all, and I don't think they eat anything. I don't know how it works with them. So, you know, feeding them is actually fairly easy. But but yeah, and then we were able to find a crew that was willing to work for free. We said, look, we're going to keep raising money, you know, and we were raising money, and you know, until we didn't need to. But you know, if you want to work on this movie, don't expect to get paid. If it happens, great, but don't expect it. And luckily in LA, you can find enough really good crew people that will work on a movie like this. So we had an amazing cinematographer, Nancy Schreiber, who I'd met at Slamdance, who's an ASC cinematographer. She's only, I think, like the third woman that was ever in the ASC, and she was a DP on Visions of Light, which is this great documentary about cinematographers. Anyway, she's an award-winning filmmaker. And so she came on board, and she was teaching a class at AFI, so she brought in a lot of her students who worked on it, and you know, a lot of people just wanted to work with her, and people knew me through Slamdance. They saw the actors, and like, oh, okay, this is something to jump in on. Anyway, and in the end, we did find an investor that came in for, you know, roughly 2/3 of the budget, and his check only cleared the third to the last day of shooting, but that was enough time to pay the crew, or at least some of the crew. I still haven't gotten paid. Some other people have, and you know, and we finished, and it was enough to finish the film. Well, that first 25,000, it wasn't even that much. I think it was 20 in the end. It came from a couple individual people, Liz, and then two people that were friends on Facebook. But like one of them was someone I knew from high school. I hadn't talked to her in 20 years at least, a lot more than that. You know, and another was another indie filmmaker. I had no idea he had money, you know, and would give it to me. So, you know, it's just, and I was like, oh, this kind of crowdsourcing is working nicely. So, and then Kickstarter was happening, and a friend of mine had done the Kickstarter, and he said, yeah, you know, you can raise a good 10 grand or so on there. But yeah, 2010, fall of 2010, we did that. So it was way before the whole Veronica Braff, you know, raise $2 million because you've got a movie star. Oh, how hard could it be? You know, it's like, no, $10,000 was a doable goal, and you know, achievable. Hard work to get it. You know, it's not easy. But you know, we did it. We did some unique things with it in how we promoted it. But also, I put our business plan. I embedded it as a PDF onto the Kickstarter page, kind of as almost a Trojan horse. So people wanted to give substantially more money, but do it as an investment. They could find the PDF. So what happened was that even though we only raised about $10,000 on Kickstarter per se, it led to us getting another 20 or 25,000 kind of ultimately beyond Kickstarter. You know, but more importantly, I mean, I always tell people Kickstarter. It's called Kickstarter. It's not called Kick Finisher. I mean, it's really there to get the ball rolling, and then how you take it from there is up to you. But I think the most important person of all the 84 backers that that we found on Kickstarter, you know, the most important person to convince is yourself. You know, because it forces you to, you know, this whole process forced me to do a business plan, to do a pitch video, and you know, the hardest person to convince to make a movie is always yourself. Everyone else, you know, they'll believe you, you know, but you know better, especially after it's your third or fourth film.
When Joel and I were developing it, we were constantly working together, so that meant we were going out to producers, we were going out to investors, we were going out to casting agents, we were going out to anyone that would read it, that could help us put together a package. So the challenges that happened were that we were attaching people that were good, that were, you know, friends of Joel's or just people who liked the script, and we were getting investors that were interested, and investors that really wanted to make the film and were willing to option it and put in the time, but because of different reasons, they weren't able to finance it at the end. So, you know, sometimes production companies will have a slate of 3 films that year, and one will go way over budget and another one will get pushed, and you know, there's always different reasons why financing can fall through. So unfortunately for us, that happened on 3 different occasions. I mean, for some films it happens 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, you know. For other films, they get financing and they move forward. You know, the third time when we lost financing, within 48 hours, the producer that we had attached, Taylor Hart is his name, who is an incredible producer, very hungry and driven and getting a lot of projects done now. Within 48 hours of the last time that we had our financing fall through, he found another production company and they brought all the money to the table. So with that, we were able to start pre-production the next day. So we had a terrible weekend thinking the film was once again shut down, and on Monday we were flying out to Savannah, Georgia to shoot the film. So it just, every single time you try to get a film into production or even into pre-production or get the financing, you're going to find obstacles along the way. So the financing falling through was just the very first obstacle.
You always have an investment packet where you have all the information and you kind of have that disclaimer in there and saying, you know what, there are better investments than indie film. If you want to really invest your money well, put it in commercial real estate. I think it's what you always go back to is when they say, well, you know, I'll make sure I get a return on my investment. You say, well, unfortunately, when you're investing in the arts, the financial investment can take time to happen, or may never happen, or may be partial. You know, you can make the terms as favorable as you want in the deal. Like, you know, we have it so that you get 120% of your investment back before we see a dime. But you always say, is that really why you're investing? You know, bring it back to the fun. Bring it back to the fact that this is going to be an adventure. You get to go on set. You get to hang out at parties. You go to film festivals and all these things, and you get to be part of the fun. We have an exec producer on Favor who put in some money, and she knew she wasn't going to get it back. Or it would be a long time, but she loved the script, and she loved Patrick, and she's been a huge advocate for us still and involved. She's gotten very involved in the film, and she came down to the Q&As, and she started putting money into other films because she really just likes the dream. She's like, I'd rather be a patron of the arts and kind of help get these films made and go see these things in front of audiences and just enjoy enabling artists than worrying about whether I get a return on my few $1,000s. It's not investing big sums of money, but I mean it's definitely helpful.
I'll tell you, what dance is easy. It's harder to raise $1 million than $25 million.
Why?
Because there's just this mindset that a film that costs $1 million, there's very little want to see or very little return of investment in a film that small. And there's a prejudice against films under $1 million.
When I was in school, so I did a degree, like a college degree, and then after that I went to this place in Canada called the Canadian Film Centre, and it's like our version of the AFI, basically. So I was writing it there as well, this script, and they give you the means to like make a little short. So I made a little short about it as well that no one will ever see, hopefully ever. It's terrible. It's all right. But so I did that, and then with that short, I approached a producer in Toronto that I was interested in, that I had actually worked with as an actress, who was doing really, really interesting work. And then, and then we went to the funders with our collective experiences, that short and an outline. And then they gave us a little bit of money to write the first draft. And then once we had the first draft, then we actually got like a little more substantial money for sort of each subsequent draft. So yeah, I mean, Canada's really great that way because we have a government system set up to support the arts, and if you can get into that system, it's also like highly debated system by multiple filmmakers, as you can understand, who are living in Canada, because if you don't get funding, you're sort of left out. But if you end up being a part of that system, then you can make an okay living for. I mean, you are getting they acknowledge that you have to take time off of your like teaching job or your side projects or whatever to concentrate on the script. So there is that ability. Yeah.
Progressive in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they do that in Europe as well. I mean, America is we're the capitalistic society here.
Sure.
So, and that, you know, that works a lot for film as well. So there's a lot of problems in the Canadian system, but there is that kind of belief that there's like true value in culture in supporting, you know, arts, which is great. This lab at TIFF, at the Toronto International Film Festival, had a screenwriting lab, like it's similar to how like Sundance is, but it was the inaugural year, and I had applied with this script, and it was a workshop with like yet another story editor. Mine was from like Sweden. We would Skype. It was like this very kind of interesting experience where she was completely out of kind of the group of screenwriters and writers and filmmakers that I was used to. So she was a totally fresh eyes on this project. And that script my script won the audience award for that. So it was awarded something, and then we kind of fast tracked to production. So that's when we were able to approach the Canadian funding bodies and ask for money for making the film, and that's a very long process. I don't know if it's boring or not, but you know, there were a lot of in putting all the financing together for this film. It was really tricky. It was just really, really tricky because of the budget level and because of certain kind of funding that we got, because there's different funding agencies in Canada, so we actually had to shoot some of it in a certain geographical location in Canada. So all the interiors are done in Ontario, and the exteriors are Japan and BC.
Oh, okay.
So that's like, that would be like the equivalent of like doing only interiors in New York and exteriors in LA or something. I mean, it's like that far apart between like Sudbury, Ontario and BC, and then obviously Japan. So yeah, and then like the lead up to actually like the day of shooting, there was like 3 intense months of prep, 6 months of soft prep, like location scouting and everything. I mean, that was like that's a blur. Like it was so intense during those final 3 months that we were all getting sick, and we were all like, it was amazing. It's thrilling because you know what's going to happen. It took so long because we knew we had to do it at a certain budget, and it's still incredibly low budget compared to what is out there. Like we're at like $1.2 million, but they don't give that to you just for kind of nothing. So you really have to be prepared and ready to go, and when it all happened. So yeah, it was a huge learning curve. I mean, yeah, it was very challenging but very thrilling. I think if you're in film, you probably love problem solving. You probably have that kind of mind, and I do. Like, it feels creative to me to like be given a challenge or an obstacle and just be like, I got this, I can do this, and analytical thinking towards figuring it out, and you just put the pieces of the puzzle together. The funny thing is, the funding agencies were pretty hands-off. I've heard other stories, but they were pretty hands-off with us in terms of content. They just wanted to see the drafts and know that we were continuing along, and in terms of like creative input, they didn't give a ton of that. So we were kind of like really, really lucky. I haven't heard that as being necessarily the case for, you know, other people. But again, because it's like a government funding, they're not really necessarily creatives that are funding it always. It's a bureaucracy. It's like it's a country that finances art. So they're, you know, making sure that you're getting your drafts in on time and that kind of bureaucracy, but they're not necessarily like commenting on the content. Like they might a little bit, but it's not hard and fast. Yeah.
So they're not saying, you know what, can we make Sweet Pea more this
likable and all of that? Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's still like there was a lot of input on the script process, like all along the way, regardless of the funding agencies, because you're just showing it to other people, and you're sending it to, you know, like the screenwriting lab, or, you know, we sent it to a Tribeca lab, you know, early on in the process too. So people are giving feedback in that sense. And yeah, there's definitely, I have stories of like that make, you know, Sweet Pea more likable and, you know, sexy, and, or I don't know, anything, but yeah, you just have to kind of know what know what the story is you're telling, and try to stay as flexible and open to other people's thoughts, but then ultimately like know the best decision to be made for the film that you're trying to make, because that's why they're giving you the money, is to hear your point of view, you know?
It's a big process trying to find money, because everyone who wants to give you money has an opinion about a script, as they should, because they're giving you money. And so there's that, and then I don't know, people like it, they don't like it. I was living in a different country. I had to come to America. I had to come to Los Angeles to kind of focus on that. So that was like even a year after of trying to kind of have meetings and go back and forth. And I mean, my last film took 4 years to be able to make, and it's not an uncommon story among filmmakers. So this has been a couple of years, but then I did a really big script change, which I think is way better. It's not a comedy anymore. It's kind of a movie about something. It's got funny parts in it, but it's not comedy. And so, you know, I was thinking about this too, and I was thinking about how an effective crowdfunding can be, because sometimes you write a script and 4 years pass and you become a different person in that time, and none of those things really make sense. And then, okay, you could go back and rewrite, but there's something, if you have an idea and you can have the immediacy of making it in that time, it becomes a full thought instead of like this constant broken up where you have to become like, you have to put down your artist hat and you have to put on your producer hat and you have to go in and you have to get money. And like, that's fine, it's all part of the thing, but it's distracting from each other. So once you can never get back on the roll, and so it takes a while. It takes a while. It takes much longer than people think. And, you know, in the meantime, like, hopefully get some other jobs to pay for your life, and you keep going.
We shot She's Gonna Have It in 1985. We were doing Kickstarter before there was Kickstarter. We just didn't have the technology. I was making phone calls, making personal visits, writing letters. So we did everything except social media, which social media was not around then.
You know, I never would have launched a campaign for 6 figures if I hadn't spent 2 years building an online audience with a website. So, you know, it's one of those 10 years to an overnight success kind of thing, where all of the work you've put in the back, you hope, you know, helps you do this thing that was the most ambitious thing I'd ever done in my life, as far as, you know, a Kickstarter campaign is all or nothing. And when you hit launch and it says $115,000 and it says $0 and 0 cents, you know, from here to there is a long way to go. But I felt like I had done everything in my power over the last couple of years to build a website, and I felt like enough people knew who I was and that it was a strong enough project with some external validation from IFP and from Lincoln Center, that it was, you know, I felt like if I failed, that I would have done everything I possibly could, and then I wouldn't feel bad about it. So, you know, the main thing was building an audience, and the way that I went about it is different than a lot of people will, as far as, you know, I was talking about the craft of filmmaking and the behind the scenes stuff, as opposed to just this one particular project. But ultimately, I think it comes down to that approach of saying, you know, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, these things aren't magic. You know, you can make a great video, but ultimately you have to have a feeling of you've been working on this for a long time, and people know who you are and are invested in your success. So it's not, you know, I think the Kickstarter campaigns that don't succeed a lot of the times are ones where people, you know, saw somebody else doing this and thought, oh, well, I can do that too, and they didn't really understand the amount of work that the other people did, the successful campaigns did, not only during their campaign, but before it, when a lot of that work happens.
I thought about it. I feel to successful, I really believe in crowdfunding in a lot of ways. I feel for it to be most successful, you need to have the support of everyone involved. And for me, David's been beyond supportive, like overwhelmingly supportive of the project, but he wasn't a producer on the film. He would say this too. He wasn't interested in the process. He wanted to let me go make it. And I sort of felt to run a successful crowdsourcing campaign for it, it would have needed his involvement, because I felt it would have been sort of disingenuous to be, the way to run a successful campaign would have been like, hey, Sedaris fans, do you want to see a Sedaris movie? And it would have sort of, I didn't feel comfortable asking him. Maybe he would have helped me and done a video, I'm not sure, but it felt wrong to ask him, for me, and I felt without his support it felt sort of wrong to run a campaign for it. Now that there's a finished film, if it had, we've closed distribution, but if I was doing a self-distribution, I would consider it now that there's a finished film, and now that I have interviews with David and elements I can use with his permission, of course, but I feel like it's each project's its own, and some projects are meant to be crowdfunded, and this one just wasn't one of them. I didn't feel like I could engage the community in the right way, and also we had some actors attached, but they ended up not being the actors in the final film, and I felt like we would have needed to utilize them, but I felt uncomfortable with that because I didn't have a working relationship with them yet, and they were, slightly bigger names than what ended up in the movie, just by the nature of whoever. At the time I cast them, they weren't bigger names, and they got bigger names and got too busy to be in the film, and I ended up with a cast I could have only dreamed of having anyway, so I'm thrilled about that, but it felt strange to bring them involved. It just didn't feel like I could do it the right way. And I feel like when I look at the really successful crowd campaigns, sure, there's some outliers that go into the $300,000 and $400,000, but I really feel like the most ambitious you really should get, is to expect is at the most, 100. I feel like even the Canyons, I think they ended up going to like 130, but you have Paul Schrader and Bret Easton Ellis, who each have massive, loyal, decades-long fan bases. And even then, they pushed a lot on that campaign, and they hit, which is an incredible amount of money, but that still wasn't enough for me to make the film. So I also felt uncomfortable going out there and being like, give me $100,000 and maybe I'll be able to find the other however much we need. It just felt wrong for this project, but I hope I can do something one day that I can make cheaply enough. This movie had to be shot on location. It had 30 speaking parts. It had, a different location every day, all exteriors. It just had things that naturally made it expensive. But I hope to do something. If I did something small, if I did a movie I could shoot on my own and with minimal crew and minimal locations, and here in Los Angeles, I would totally consider doing crowdsourcing that way.
Well, I've been lucky to find private money to fund my documentaries, but there are more traditional sources, and that's generally teaming up with either a production company or a network. It's a traditional way. You go and you pitch a network, HBO, what have you, and they're going to go into business with you. That's ideally the way you do things. That's not easy either. So these other avenues have come along. Grants I've never done because you need the patience of Job to do that. That takes forever, and the money's coming in very small amounts. It's possible. I have a good friend doing a documentary now on WC Handy, and she received money, grant money, and so she's been filming as she goes along. So it is possible. The crowdfunding is also difficult. I've had 3 friends who have successfully funded at various price points, up from $35,000 up to $200,000, and that's very rare, but it's doable on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And then there's private individuals. That's another form that I found. That's also difficult, but it does cut through a lot of the back and forth with grants or networks or what have you. So that's always the number one question, and the toughest thing is how do you get the money to make these things. So it's really going out to the marketplace and finding out they're going to say, well, what's in it for them? Can they make money off this enterprise? Are they going to be able to see the return on their dollar, on their investment? So that's why you consider these things when you're picking your topics. You want to look at the marketplace and say, is there room in the market for this documentary? Has there been competition on this subject? If so, is there room for one more? If not, was there a reason nobody wanted to do this topic? So you're going to look at all of that, as you go into funding. But it's always the most difficult thing. There are new ways to do it. I wouldn't say no to the crowdsourcing, because if you have a good pitch and you have a good idea, and you maybe only need funds to either get started or to finish, maybe $35,000 or $50,000, that's pretty doable. I had some friends who needed finishing funds of $200, and they raised $210 or so. So it is possible to do if you have an appealing subject.
The first thing that I did was go to a friend of mine named Michael Green, who had been the head of NARIS. That's the group that gives out the Grammy Awards. And I had known Michael for about 15 years. And I called him up and said, I have a project that I think you might be interested in. So he said, well, what is it? So I told him briefly on the phone. He said, well, what have you got on it? I said, well, right now all I have is a bunch of pictures and some stories. So I had photographs. I made a book, a folder that had a lot of the photographs of the women in it, and I wrote up the stories of each of them that I had done after this year of research. And I went up to see Michael and gave him the book. And he said, yeah, this looks interesting. What do you want? And I said, I want enough money to make a demo reel. And he said, okay, I'll give you the money. So we did. We went out and we shot our first interviews, and we did a 7-minute demo reel. And with that demo reel, we then went out to major funders and started asking for money for the project. So that was our first steps.
I was in the process of finding my source, my funding for the feature film, and I was searching for like $300,000. It was like, it's a lot of money. So I was like, when that idea was just like, can I make that story of the Under Horizon and just because I had a version of the script, and can I just reshape everything to make it around 60 grand, 85 grand? And I scaled it down, and I was asking favors from people, and it's kind of a cliche, but yeah, you ask people favors, sponsors, and then it worked out. And it just, sometime by doing something, it clicks an idea. And when I did that short film, that was the revelation of, oh, let's screw the 300, let's make it for maybe 60, and I'm sure it's going to be easier to find investors, and it worked. Because that's the thing, I'm from Montreal, but I don't shoot in Montreal, so I cannot use government money.
Grants.
And yeah, I cannot use grants and stuff like that. And then when I go to the States, I cannot apply because I'm not American. So I don't have any choice to go into the private funding. So I was lucky. People say, where did you find that money? I just ask everyone, and I didn't want to do the Kickstarter thing. You need to have an army to do those things, and I don't have the patience to do that. When I want to shoot something, I want to shoot it now, and so I ask people, and people, and there's a thing where you have at least short films, music videos, and you have amazing demo reel. You have a good material to show to people, and you have a business plan. That's what I did. I did a business plan. I have my great demo reel, beautiful website to at least showcase everything, and then it's easier to contact people. So I had one person that loved my work say, I got someone in Texas who was interested. So I talked to the guy, I showed him my work, business plan, and he said yes. So it's, a lot of people say, it's who you know, but yeah, it's kind of true. It's going to be impossible if you've never done short film, or you just barely start, you don't have a great demo reel, and you think you're going to have like $250,000. There's good luck with that, because people work with visual. You need to be able to show, just even for my business plan, it was mostly all pictures. So yes, you have the numbers and everything, but for business people, that's important. But at the same time, they want to see that you have your clear vision, because that's what they're investing in, a clear vision that, is going to make some money. But so yeah, the fact that you have your style, your signature, that you have a body of work, then that's going to be more impressive. And then if they Google you and you have magazine and interviews, whatever, that they see that you've traveled a little bit, it's way more reassuring that you say, I just came out of the school and I hope to get $300,000 because I wrote a script. Who cares? There's like 1 million people who does that. So at least a visual to apply to that business plan.
In my experience, they want to see a written pitch, but they don't want it to be 40 pages. They want it to be between 5 and 10 pages, that they can get the idea of your film that quickly. And nowadays, if you can put any kind of pitch reel together, sizzle reel, kind of trailer, I know you haven't shot it yet supposedly, but maybe you can, for free on your own dime, you can go down to your subject and get an afternoon with them and get them on tape. And if you shoot it with your HDSLR and you cut it on your cloud editing system, you put it together for very little, and you have their stills which you can license, and so you put together a little 2-minute pitch movie along with a 5-page pitch. That's all you need. They're going to get it from that. So at least come in with those 2 things, and you have a shot.
I have to say, I call it a no budget, which is because we had to spend I'd say between 5,000 and 6,000, which is no budget in terms of movie making, and they were all private savings. So So we went and made the movie with literally no phones and no one involved. So in a way it was making us feel free. But I mean, I think that even though that was the story of this movie, I would tell young filmmakers not to be afraid of getting money. You have to go and get the money where it is out there. So getting investors is not a bad thing. It is not going to ruin your creative vision. On the contrary, I think that on the contrary, it can be seen as a limit. But if you are as serious and as good as a filmmaker, you will always find a way to go around that and to tell your story, the story you have in your heart, in your mind. So I don't think that would be a limit, even when a lot of people are putting money from everywhere and then ask for people to for certain kind of things. But it's like every other limit on a movie set. I mean, when you're making a movie, there are a lot of limits, and there are a lot of obstacles, and you just have to go around it, around the mountain, and just find a way to just continue and keep telling the story. We just wanted to shoot that fast that we had the money there sleeping for us. So we just went out and made the movie, and we didn't want to wait too long for crowdfunding and to put our hopes on hold. You know, it's like when you're doing crowdfunding, it's great, but you can also be waiting longer and longer than expected, and then the level of interest for the story and commitment is getting down and down and down. So whereas for Pink Zone, it was kind of for me, the reference in the way we did this film is Roger Corman. We just went and did a Roger Corman kind of film with just no budget and just shot it for the sake of the story, with just the help of friends and our private savings. For me, this one was primarily to Pink Zone to cut my teeth in, and the next one, the way I'm writing it right now, is on a much bigger scale. And even though it's very grounded to reality, it will involve much more money. So I'm open to any kind of investments. Can go from crowdfunding to private investors. We will go who will be interested to finance it. I know that especially with the film festivals where I'm presenting Pink Zone right now, a lot of people are asking me, okay, what's next? And I'm talking about them about this story, and I met these people who are, because they saw Pink Zone and loved it so much, they are committed to maybe help finance the next one. And so that's why this movie also is great as a way to engage people to finance the next one. Okay. And that's why also for the next film festivals we're going to do with Pink Zone, especially the big ones in Europe, we're going to still continue present Pink Zone as a way to finance the next one.
Every feature film that I've done has gotten financed differently because that's what you do when you get there. It's sort of like there's no plan. If I was independently wealthy or had some sort of whatever, there's no plan. It's what you do at the time. With 10 Till Noon, we raised money through traditional investors. We burned through a lot of favors and we burned through all our money people. With Official Rejection, we ended up self-financing the whole movie. It was, but a lot of that piggybacked 10 Till Noon. So we were able to do it pretty cheaply. We deferred a lot of money in that film, so we were able to do it that way. With Favor, we crowdfunded it, and that was the new thing to do, and that worked. So for the next one, I'm not sure what we're going to do. It's kind of like you can't kind of do the same thing twice. I mean,
why? I find it
interesting. With traditional distributors, distributors, we talk about it so much. With traditional investors, you sort of, they're going to lose money, probably. And if they make money, great. But if they do, it's in the long game. So until the film's made money, it's hard to go back to the same person and go, hey, by the way, another 10 grand? What do you think? Another 30 grand? It's very hard to do that because it takes a lot of years for them to be profitable. So, and, you know, in the rare case you get a hit, but and, you know, and the thing is, we're friendly with them all. It's not like they're like, oh, where's our money? But you know, they're not. You don't want to go back and try to tap them again. You want to go to the next round. So, that's why you kind of don't want to go to the same place twice until you can come back with really, really good news. Hey, we finally, you know, have some profit for you. Self-financing is hard because you burn through your money, you know, quickly, and it takes a while for that to build back up. And then with crowdfunding, I think it's the same thing. You go back to that well the second time, especially before the first one's out. I think it's hard. I think you can do it. Gary King's doing his third crowdfunding campaign. I think it's more successful if you do it in small bursts too. I know one guy, this filmmaker named Gorman, who does it. He's always got a campaign going, but they're only like $1,000, $2,000, and he's raised lots of money, but he just keeps feeding, and people kind of keep double dipping, triple dipping because it's a small. That's one way of doing it. But you know, it's like you have to wait. It's like harvesting fruit. You know, you gotta wait for the fruit to grow back. With the new film that we're putting together now, Small Hours, we're trying to go back to traditional investors again, but we're going to try to hit different ones, and we're going to try to go for more money this time. So that's sort of how that works. I think it's really dependent upon the film, the time it's being made, and what you have available to you at that time. You'll find a way. You know, that's the way to go.
I think that you have to have a real sense of where people are coming from, of what's going on with them that makes this possible for them or not. And you have to live within the reality of that. And maybe a no is a no now, but is not a no in the future. And then, you know, there's some people who say, take me off your list. Well, if they say that, then it's a no. You say, okay, we're sorry we bothered you. And, you know, you have to do that too, because you will be bothering a lot of people who don't want to be bothered about this, who have their own problems or their own projects that they're raising money for. So you just have to be very sensitive every step of the way. I don't think you can afford to be hurt. Your personal feelings have got to be left on the doorstep somewhere else. You are in a very, very difficult and dynamic situation when you're fundraising, and there really is no room for personal feelings of hurt or rejection. You got to just get rid of that. It's not useful to you in any way. This is just a job you're doing, and you won't be successful at every phase of it, but overall you will be successful, and that's what you look for. Oh, I was not thick-skinned. I was your typical fragile young girl who was easily hurt. But, you know, you learn. You get out there and you tough it out and you learn, and that's what you do. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and say, hey, you know, that doesn't bother me anymore. I don't care. Who are they? You know, you're who you are, and that's what you're searching for all the time. And once you find that, once you find your own personal strength, nobody can shake that. I have a little sign that I put on my computer that another producer said. I found it in, I don't know, some magazine. It said, if anyone says no to you and you're discouraged for 1 second, you're dead. Okay. Meaning I cannot indulge myself in any kind of self-pity whatsoever. I got too many other people to talk to who are going to say yes. That has been a real help for me.